Well, there's one word echoing around northern Australia at the moment, and that word is compensation. And here's just one example of what's involved. There are about 12,000 head of cattle stranded at the moment at the ports of Broome, Port Hedland and Darwin. The average cost of yarding, watering and feeding these cattle is about $8 a head per day. That's close to $100,000 a day for the lot. Add to this the demurrage fees for the ships. That could be anything, but I've been told of one big ship which is costing close to $40,000 a day. That's for one ship for one day. Now, who's going to pay for all this? These cattle went through all the correct protocols for export. Producers and exporters went by the book, and the government has ordered their business to stop. This imbroglio, which we're told is fundamentally about animal welfare, could become yet another lawyer's picnic. Steve Meerwald is the boss of Willards, Australia's largest shipper and exporter of livestock. He joins Landline from Fremantle.
Well, it's still a great deal of uncertainty as to exactly what's going on. There's obviously now a lot of commercial reality coming into play as to what the impacts, the consequences of this abrupt decision relative to the total suspension. And that's all just playing out. We've seen a complete reversal in what's been in the media in the last 2 days, from the sympathy and welfare issues relative to the cattle to now a great deal of empathy for the commercial participants in the northern pastoral industry who are really being held to ransom as a consequence of this particular suspension.
Yes, the word I'm hearing is compensation. As a shipper and an exporter, that impacts you both ways?
Well, we'll look at all the options. We have charterers who have commitments on our vessels that we're looking for them to uphold their end of the contracts. Obviously, they're going to have issues doing that. We also have some significant expenses and damages ourselves as we restructure our shipping program to alleviate the worst of the consequence of this immediate suspension.
I get the impression that your view is shared through the industry, that this issue has not been handled well at many levels.
Badly handled on a number of fronts. It's not an easy situation. Everybody's under pressure. It's difficult. It requires leadership, and I think that there's been some lapses in leadership across the board.
That's Steve Meerwald from Willards in Fremantle. Now, a final word for the moment, at least, on the compensation issue and the government's failure to commit. I can smell a levy coming on, and in the end, this could cost the government absolutely nothing, at least in financial terms. And so far, the impact of the export ban has had little impact at the sale yards, at least not in the national sense. But I have heard of processors going to northern sale yards like Cloncurry and offering prices 50 cents down on last week. Meanwhile, cold and wet weather has limited turn-off in many southern areas, and combined with softer demand from processors and a reduction in quality, prices eased across the board. So the categories all went down. And when you look at those prices, producers might check the Beef Central newsletter, which reports on renewed interest in EU-accredited cattle and the significant margins they can bring. So the Eastern Young Cattle Indicator dropped 3 cents to close at $3.85, and sheep and lamb prices softened marginally as well last week, but historically prices are still high. Players in this market could not help but notice the record prices for wool, more on that later, but the rise of the once again golden fleece is certainly going to impact on mutton and lamb prices. Now to grains, where the dominant factor is the price of corn. It reached a record high last week, and the outlook is bullish. Demand is being driven by ethanol production, which is linked to the price of oil, which influences the price of synthetics, which in turn bounces to the price of cotton, and in turn reflects in the price of wool, a bit like the knee bone is connected to the thigh bone, etc., etc. So corn jumped. Soybean and wheat prices were soft as demand for soy falls on the back of weakening orders from China, and there's a likely production lift for American wheat despite those massive floods. And the wheat prices were reflected back home at the ASX, where futures for January delivery were also down. WA wheat, $317 a tonne, and New South Wales milling wheat for the same month dropped to $294 a tonne. Back to New York now for the soft commodities, and sugar finished with mixed results, but was reasonably firm for the week. Cotton remains bearish, although there's debate whether it's the high price or just simple lack of demand, which is the major influence on the market at present. At $1.51 a pound, that's still pretty good. And in other cotton news, the administrators of Cubby Station have agreed to fund planting for yet another season. Finally, to wool, where records have been broken. For the first time, the key indicator has broken through 1,400 cents. Last week saw China dominate as usual in a market where demand for the middle microns was especially strong. The Eastern market indicator closed at 1,420 cents, a lift of 1.6% for the week. And that's the Landline check on prices.